my opportunity now to ask some questions before calling upon the next senator. My first is for Sheriff Gonzalez. Good morning. Under the Trump administration, there were reports of ICE agents falsely claiming to be police and concealing their true identities to persuade community members to open their doors and allow agents into their homes without judicial warrants. This was found to be a violation of the Fourth Amendment in a class action lawsuit brought last spring in California. In addition, ICE has used unmarked vehicles to pull over people in areas heavily used by farm workers, for example, to increase the number of community arrests, even though they are not authorized to stop people in this manner. So, Sheriff, as someone who has worked in local law enforcement, it's great perspective to bring here. Do you believe ICE officers impersonating local police officers helps or harms public safety? And as a follow-up question to that, what steps would you take, if confirmed, to ensure that ICE officers would not engage in such practices in the future?
Thank you, Senator. Well, first, I would want, if confirmed, I would come in to understand what the current protocols are. Obviously, I believe you said there was some maybe legal action that was taken on this matter, so obviously we would want to make sure we're working in accordance with the law. At the same time, I understand from my experience that sometimes we may have to take certain action depending on the individuals that we're having to take action on, where it may merit a different higher threshold in our response. But with that said, I think it always needs to be in the context of proportionality to make sure that we're not unnecessarily scaring communities, with the presence, and that there's not other mitigating factors that we have to consider. It's important that ICE does not work in a manner that in any way intentionally just seeks to terrorize communities or anything of the sort. I think it's important for us to be a professional agency that could take care of its done effectively. I want to make sure that the men and women of ICE that have to carry out these actions are safe, that the community is safe, and that we could do it in a lawful, orderly way as much as possible.
Right. No, and I appreciate that, and in particular as a follow-up to some of Senator Scott's questioning about the ability for ICE agents to enforce the law. Well, of course, but that's pretty broad. Again, as you can appreciate, you bring the important perspective of local law enforcement has their specific role to play. Federal law enforcement that is there to enforce federal laws plays a different role to play. In unique circumstances, there's some collaboration that may be justifiable or in order, but by and large, it's a very unique mission. And when federal agents are intentionally or otherwise misrepresenting themselves as local law enforcement, I think that does undermine more broader efforts by local law enforcement to build trust and rapport with community members and community leaders. So that's something that, if confirmed, I look forward to working with you to address. My next questions are for Mr. Santos. Much of the attention on the Census Bureau's work is on the decennial census, right? Especially this last year, given all the challenges to the 2020 decennial census. What is less known is that the Census Bureau also conducts a number of other surveys in between the decennial census, including the American Community Survey, known as the ACS, that relies on sampling and data modeling in the years between the decennial censuses. The ACS does ask more detailed questions, more questions and more detailed questions, and new data is released every year on the changing demographics of the United States, including information about housing, income levels, marital status, educational attainment levels, and so much more. This information, coupled with the decennial census, is especially important for local communities and government when crafting policy, making investments, allocating resources and services. Mr. Santos, how can we ensure that the sampling is robust enough so that it accurately represents especially smaller population areas in the United States where there may be a higher need for investments in education, infrastructure, social safety programs, et cetera?
Thank you very much for that question. The American community survey is a national treasure because it really does allow us to understand who we are as a nation in our rich diversity and our situation. And what basically, I guess not too many people know this, but the American Community Survey used to be part of the decennial census, but a subsample, so it was captured once a year. By moving it over to a continuous survey, not only do we get through sampling the information, the rich information that we were accustomed to under the decennial census model, but we get it contemporaneously, much more contemporaneously. We can track over time. As part of the design, the statistical sample design of the American Community Survey, there are oversamples, that there are deliberate overrepresentations of rural areas, of small towns, et cetera, that are sprinkled throughout the decade so that we can capture that information accurately and reflect it for the benefit of the public.
Great. And one other question. Over the past few years, there's been significant debate about how the race and ethnicity questions is phrased on the census. Many experts claim that those of Hispanic origin are not accurately being counted due to their mixed race status. The census currently asks if an individual is of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin. It then asks for the individual's race, which can be confusing to many Hispanics, who are often from mixed race and ethnic backgrounds. In 2015, the Census Bureau did its own test using a combined race and ethnicity question and found that more individuals identified as Hispanic. However, in order for this question to be put on the census, the Office of Management and Budget would have to change their standard categories. So, Mr. Santos, you've written about this topic and discussed the need for data collection methods to evolve and adapt to ensure everyone is fairly represented. Can you briefly, I know our time is up, but can you briefly tell us how you'll work with OMB to try to establish a combined race and ethnic question for the 2030 census?
Yes, I can fully commit to working with OMB on this to the extent that it's possible to use a single race ethnicity question. I would be in favor of that. The census director doesn't have the authority to include any specific questions. It has to abide by OMB, but I can use my own personal perspective as a Latino and use my research experience and my leadership position to work with OMB to make sure that the proper attention is given to that specific issue so that we can see whether or not we can incorporate it into the next decennial.
Thank
Or
you.
even the American Community Survey.
Thank you.